Hi there, I hope you're doing fantastic today. Today we're going to be talking about mastering, and specifically my mastering chain that I used to win a mastering competition amongst 5 different mastering engineers. Hi, my name is Tyson. I'm a mastering engineer here at Dinosaur Dog Mastering, and today I wanted to share with you a session that I did of a master that won a competition between 5 other mastering engineers. Before I dive into that though, I want to share with you my ultimate mixing checklist. You can get that for free by downloading that in the description. The first link in the description will bring you to a page where you can download the ultimate mixing checklist if you want better and faster mixes. If you're not already aware, this is a very common thing that happens in the mastering world where an artist wants to get their song mastered or their album mastered, and so then they'll send a single song to multiple different mastering engineers to basically do a shootout of seeing who can do the best master for your song and who is the best fit for this project. And so I was in the middle of one of these competitions and I ended up winning the project for having the best master. But the irony of this is that the week before I almost quit mastering. I wanted to share that story with you before I actually show you the chain, because I think it's going to be super valuable for you to hear kind of the background of going into the week that I actually did this particular master. The week prior, I was in Salt Lake City, which is about 5 hours south of where I am at in Boise, Idaho. I was just meeting a bunch of studios. I was, touring a whole bunch of studios, meeting other engineers, etc., just kind of networking in general and learning more about the area down there. While I was there, I went into the studio. There was an engineer there who I was talking with, and he was, I would consider, the very typical audio engineer type. He had gone to audio engineering school, was very knowledgeable, but he also was very into gear. I'd never claimed to be a gearhead. I do not really care about gear that much. I think it's cool, but I'm not necessarily a gearhead by any means, any stretch of the imagination. While I was talking to him, he was just bringing up all these pieces of gear, some of them mainstream, some of them kind of more esoteric. And he mentioned this one set of converters. I didn't know what these converters were. He then was like, "You've never heard about these. You've never heard about this brand." And I was like, "No, I haven't." In that moment, he was, "You're a mastering engineer and you've never heard of this?" At that moment, it made me question basically everything I had done thus far. I haven't heard of these. Like, these are supposed to be some of the best mastering converters in the world, and I've never heard of them. Like, what am I doing with my life? And I immediately thought, I'm like, wait, am I actually an expert in this field? Am I actually good at mastering? What am I doing mastering if I haven't actually heard of this gear that he's talking about? And it might seem kind of dumb, because if I can do a good master, I can do a good master. It doesn't matter if I know all the specific pieces of gear that other people are using. But in that moment, I completely doubted everything that I knew about mastering and being a professional in this field. I think that it's helpful to realize that no matter who you are, everybody feels that to an extent. Everybody feels like an imposter to what they do, even if they have, fancy letters behind their name. I think it's even worse too if you're in your bedroom producing a song, you think that you may not be good enough to produce your own music, or that you don't have the right gear to produce your music. And that's absolutely not true. The reason I wanted to bring up this story and kind of connect it back to this master and the mastering chain I'm about to show you is that we will often discount our experience and our knowledge about a certain field just because somebody else makes us feel like we're faking it. And we all have that kind of voice inside of us and saying, "Hey, you're not actually good at this. Like, who are you to create music? Who are you to produce music or say that you're a mixing engineer or a mastering engineer?" And ultimately, if you're good at it, you can do it. If you're not good at it, then you can get better at it and still do it. So there's no reason why you can't do something, and ultimately, there's just a fear that's inside of you that's holding you back. And you don't need to listen to that. The biggest growth that you're going to have is pushing through that. All that said, getting a little philosophical here. In this master that I did, most of my mastering is still in the box. I've considered buying a lot of analog gear, but at the same point, I don't necessarily know that it's going to add a ton to my masters. I know that the other 4 mastering engineers in this mastering competition were using analog gear, but yet my master was still chosen as the best master for their song. Obviously, it's not necessary to be professional. Don't let your lack of gear or what somebody else says about your lack of gear hold you back in your music. Ultimately, I want you to create awesome music regardless of what resources you have and what knowledge you have at your disposal. I want you to create awesome music, and ultimately it's the knowledge that's going to make the difference in your music. And so every week I'm trying to give you the best tips and techniques that I know in order to improve your music. With all of that said, I want to show you the actual mastering chain that I used in this master to win a mastering competition amongst 5 other mastering engineers. So let's dive into the DAW and take a look. I wanted to show you the actual mastering chain that I used on this song, which won a mastering competition between 4 to 5 other mastering engineers. And so these are not just any mastering engineers, these are actually professionals in the industry working full-time, probably have studios way nicer than mine. Actually, I know they have studios that are nicer than mine. And so I wanted to walk through exactly my approach to this master and just share everything that I can about how I did this master. I'm gonna play the raw for you just really quick, and then I'm gonna enable the plugins and walk through exactly what I did throughout this entire master. All right, so you can get the idea. It's not instrumental, but it's kind of has that instrumental vibe to me, really. So the original move that I made was, here, let me pull up the Paz Analyzer too, so you can kind of see what's going on. So the original move I made was just to cut out all this low end. This is set right at 34 Hertz, and then just a little bit cut in the low end itself for around 120, 130 Hertz, just because it was a little bit muddy down there, and I wanted to clean that up a little bit just with a really transparent EQ. So here's this change. You really won't be able to hear much. I'll disable it. You can really see the analyzer here, the difference that it makes in the low end, just cleaning up all that stuff that you can't actually hear anyway. So you can see there's a lot of energy right here, really with that bass guitar, and I wanted to try to bring out that kick drum rather than just the bass guitar right around in this low end, because that was the feedback that I had gotten from the mixing engineer. He had said I was really, struggling to get that kick to actually shine in this mix because it was tuned very, very low, and so I wanted to ensure that I'm trying to honor his wishes of bringing out that kick drum. The other thing I'm observing here is that this mix is very dark and there's not very much top end, and so I definitely had that in mind when I was moving forward in the next step here. So the next thing I did is I added some console saturation. That's really all I did, just to add some more sonic energy to the entire mix so I could EQ it more properly. Normally would do an console EQ here as well, such as this guy here. I might have added him, but in this case, I didn't feel there wasn't really any mid-range that I needed to fix desperately, so I didn't bother with that, and I moved directly into using the Pultec. So what I'm doing with the Pultec here is, again, I'm trying to bring out that kick drum as much as I could, and so I have this set a little right below 60 Hertz, around 54, and with a very, very big boost. Normally, I would not go more than 3, but again, because I was trying to bring out the kick drum, I went down to where I found that kick drum way in that low end, brought it up, and then attenuated right above it. So this, if you're not familiar with the Pultecs, this attenuation knob is actually decreasing it right above where I'm boosting it. So if I'm boosting it right at 54 Hertz, this is probably sitting right around 80, 90 Hertz or so, and reducing that. The other thing I did was I boosted the highs, which is a very common thing with the Pultec. I almost always will add some additional top end to it with the Pultec because it adds this, nice tube saturation to the mix. And so I did that. And then I also boosted around 2.7 kilohertz because that was right where the vocals were sitting, and I wanted to bring the vocals out a little bit more and allow them to shine. And so they usually sit around 3 kilohertz or so. So if your vocals are too quiet in the mix and you want to bring that out in the master and you can't fix it in the mix, that is the go-to technique that I would use, is just bringing that up right there. You don't have to use the Pultec, but is just what I was already using, so I just went ahead and made that change. Okay, so here's the kind of A/B of just the Pultec. So you can really feel there's a lot of warmth that's being added and a ton of low end. And I did this intentionally. I knew that honestly there's too much low end being added, but I knew that I was going to balance it out with the next move I made after this. But the biggest thing that this change is just adding a ton of saturation to this. It's a very nice warm EQ, and so it imbued a lot of that characteristic to the master. And I really liked that because this song is kind of, it's more vibey. It's not really a very modern sound necessarily. It's not going for that high fidelity vibe. And so I really liked what the tube sound was doing to this particular master. And then the last step is just adding the clariphonic. Again, this is boosting a ton in the top end, but that's because I was boosting so much in the low end. I felt I needed to kind of offset that with this clariphonic. This is just an awesome EQ. Highly recommend picking this one up if you don't have it, or finding another parallel EQ that works well for you. Another one that comes to mind is the Fresh Air by Slate Digital. It's another one that's very similar to the clariphonic. I prefer the clariphonic, but to each his own. Okay, so here is this last step. So here's with it to Pultec, and then I'll add this clariphonic here as well. All right, so you get the idea. It's just adding a lot of that top end information. It's very smooth. It brings out all that detail that we really wanted in the master. So one thing I want to point out is I didn't really change the overall vibe of the master too much. It's still a relatively dark song, and that was the intention from the mixing engineer, so I didn't want to change that too much. And by adding so much low end, though, I felt I could justify adding a bunch of the top end with the clariphonic and really adding to that. So that was all my EQ settings, and let's move on to the actual compression. The first step that I did is add this compressor, and so the reason I use this compressor, my go-to one is generally this guy, because this is the emulation of the G-Comp SSL, and which is a very, very famous and common bus compressor to use on masters and your mix bus, etc. But because this song was, again, not necessarily going for that high fidelity vibe, I opted for this guy, which is a more vintage style compressor and added a lot more of that character. So here is this change. One other thing, I wanted to add a little bit more punch to the master, and so that was the purpose of adding this compression. So I used a longer attack. It's set almost to the longest possible, and then the release is almost to the shortest possible, just to add some more punch on those transients, bring out those drums just a little bit more inside of this mix. So I'll play it and then add this here in just a couple seconds or so. I'm getting quite a bit of compression out of this for this being a master. I'm getting around 2 decibels or so of compression, quite a bit more than I would generally do for a punchy type compression, but because of the way that this compressor works, it just worked better for this particular master. Generally, I aim for about 1 decibel of compression when I'm using a more punchy style compression on the master. One thing I did do in this that I can't actually demonstrate for you is I clipped it using my converters in my interface, and this just adds a little bit more kind of depth almost to the master, and then cuts off some of those loud transients that are making their way through the master. This is just kind of that last 2 to 1% of the master. It's not necessary to get a professional sounding master, but I did do that on this particular master, so I wanted to let you know, even though I can't show you that particular move. And then the last step is just adding my leveler here, and I didn't use any of the normal compression here. I just added some punchy type leveling, for lack of a better term. And then I did add a little bit more transient information on the top and bottom end, just to allow those to pass through a little bit more, compressing more of the mids. So it just had that more kind of sparkly vibe and powerful vibe as this was added. So here's before and after I added the limiter. So one thing I want to point out is that I did not push this master very loud, and that was intentional to maintain a lot of the original dynamics of the mix. This is a very orchestral piece almost, and so I didn't want to just crush all the dynamics out of it and make it less dynamic than it already was, just because this mix is not, it's not like a punk rock mix where I can really just crush it and make it powerful and loud and all that stuff. So it's very dependent on the material that you're given based on how loud you actually want to make this master. Generally, I will go up to about -8 RMS for a master, right where this little yellow bar is. But this one, it was sitting around -11 most of the time during these louder sections. I think it peaked up to -9 or so at its very peak, but ultimately this was not a track that I really wanted to crush and just destroy all the dynamics out of it. And as it translates onto streaming services, it still sounds very good. And it doesn't sound quieter than everything else because I had properly balanced it sonically using my EQ chain. All right, and that was it. Did my normal fades and stuff, and it sounds awesome. So this was my whole mastering chain that I used to win a mastering competition between 5 mastering engineers, and ultimately my master was the one that they chose to move forward with because they liked it the most. With that said, thanks for watching. If you found this at all helpful, don't forget to subscribe, as I release videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to help you get more professional music. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.